Today, Honda have announced the brand new 2023 CB750 Hornet, and it's going to be the replacement for this bike, the CB650R Middleweight Naked. Now, I reckon it's a brilliant bike, but it does have a few shortcomings versus the competition that we've got right here. And the good news for the Hornet is that it seems to address pretty much all of them. In fact, on paper, it looks pretty incredible. So in this video, we'll go through all of the details. I'll show you more about the bikes that it's going head to head with, and I'll tell you why now I think in the affordable middleweight naked segment, the Hornet is going to be the bike to beat. But before we get started, a massive thanks to Superbike Factory for sponsoring this video. They've got an awesome selection of used bikes in this segment of the market, so if you're on a budget and you don't want to buy new, then check out the links in the description where there are some proper bargains. Take this SV650X for example, just 3 miles on the clock, and yet it's 1,500 quid off the RRP new. It's an absolute steal. So once again, a massive thanks to Superbike Factory for their support and for letting me shoot this video with their bikes. Now look, the engine in this bike is actually pretty banging. You could say it's one of its competitive advantages. You get a 650 inline 4 that's way more revvy and top-endy than the twin cylinders in most of the other bikes in this segment. It makes 94 horsepower peak up at 12,000 RPM, and that makes it by far and away the most powerful bike out of the bunch. Plus, it's got that proper sports bike feel and sound, which is definitely going to appeal to some riders. But I guess the only downside is that a lot of these bikes, the middleweight nakeds, are just as likely to be used for the weekday commute as they are for a sporty Sunday blast. And that's where this engine starts to feel a little bit gutless, where other bikes like the MT-07 actually excel. But Honda has sought to address this with the Hornet, with a 755cc parallel twin, with the same 270 crank as the Yamaha for that V-twin-esque sound and feel. But the extra 100cc's or so of capacity mean that the torque is stronger than the competition at 75 Nm, and it's made at 7,500 RPM, which should give it a nice meaty mid-range. So it should pull much stronger than the CB650R at urban speeds, but also it still revs up quite nicely, and the peak power figures are impressive. 90.5 horsepower made at 9,500 RPM, so quite a bit lower in the revs than the CB650R, and yet nearly the same power output. Obviously, I'll have to reserve judgment until I actually get to ride one, but at first glances, these figures look excellent. So that's about 20 more horsepower than the Yamaha, the Kawasaki, and the Suzuki, which is a massively significant margin. And the only bike in this segment that comes close is the Triumph Trident 660 with about 80 horsepower. But that's still about 10 less than the Hornet, and it makes quite a bit less torque. Now I know what you're thinking, it probably guzzles fuel to achieve those figures. Well, it's not so. Obviously we have to take these claimed figures from the manufacturers with a pinch of salt, but on paper the fuel consumption looks pretty competitive, and actually it'll get the biggest fuel capacity in the market. So with that decent consumption, you actually get the most range. On top of that, a fair bit of work has gone into slimming the Hornet down. It gets a new steel diamond frame design that sheds 2 kilograms alone versus the CB650R. And in total, they found 13 kilograms, which means the curb weight for the Hornet comes in at a pretty competitive 190 kilograms. And that was always a bit of a shortcoming of the CB650R. Yes, it's the most powerful in the market, but the 203 kilogram curb weight sort of blunted its advantage. The MT-07 feels a lot more lively and flickable, and a big part of that is the 184 kilogram curb weight, which is absolutely unparalleled. Now sure, the new Hornet doesn't quite reach these levels of lightness, but it is a lot closer now to the Kawasaki and the Trident, plus it's got that massive power advantage. So if you look at the power to weight ratios, it really ought to be the quickest in a straight line. Now in a market where price is a highly potent factor in many customers' buying decisions, of course you're not going to get the best of the best in terms of suspension and brakes. The Yamaha, Kawasaki and Suzuki all use pretty basic right way up forks and preload adjustable monoshocks, as well as some pretty bog standard braking setups. The Trident offers a little more spec with a 41mm Showa upside down fork, and it pays off. The handling on that bike is exceptional, but you've got to pay for it. It's the most expensive of those 4 bikes, and by quite a stretch. But the CB650 TR has always held even more advantage over the other bikes. Suspension is similar to the Trident, so it's a Showa fork as well. They're separate function big piston fork, and there's a similar preload adjustable shock at the rear. But as for the brakes, well, you've got radially mounted 4-piston Nissin calipers that have always felt way better to me than any of these other bikes. Now, the good news for the Hornet is that it pretty much directly inherits these components. And sure, there's way more to handling than just splashing the cash on the best kit. The geometry and setup of the bike is a way more important factor, but with that big drop in weight and the decent kit, it's got some of the makings of a great handling bike. The other area in which these bikes skimp a little is with the tech. The MT-07, for example, just gets ABS, so no riding modes or fancy rider aids or multimedia connectivity, just a good simple bike for the money. The only bike that bucks that trend a little is the most recent arrival, and that's the Trident. You've got switchable traction control, 2 riding modes, a little 2-inch TFT display which can be used for navigating the menus, as well as the Bluetooth connectivity accessory which opens up the ability to control calls, messages, media, and navigation features through the dash and switchgear. But Honda seem to have trumped them again with a 5-inch color TFT, 4 riding modes, adjustable power modes, engine braking and traction control, all of which can be saved in the user configurable riding mode. There's even a USB-C port for charging devices, self-canceling indicators, an emergency brake light function, a slip assist clutch, and a quick shifter accessory which is also adjustable in its sensitivity between 3 settings. It's basically got the absolute works for a bike at this level, and again, it comes out on top in this market. So that's more power, more torque, a competitive curb weight, better chassis components than the rest of the market, better tech, and all in a package that I think looks pretty decent as well. I mean, sure, it's not jaw-droppingly gorgeous, but I still think it's a nice enough looking bike, and so that's probably got you thinking, well, what's the catch? I mean, I was thinking the same, and I thought it'd be the price. But get this, the launch price for the Hornet is just under 7 grand. I can't quite get my head around it. I mean, I'm sure the price will creep up as it does with launch prices, just like the Trident did. But still, we've got to judge it on the price we've been given now, and it looks like it's going to be ridiculous value for money. These are all great options on the used market, but if you're adamant that you want to buy new, it's going to be very difficult to look past the new Hornet. The only bike that could potentially rain on the Hornet's parade is the new parallel twin from Suzuki that's been spied out testing. That looks set to replace the SV650 at some point, and I reckon it will be similarly punchy to the Hornet. Still, we don't have the full details yet, but if you want to know my thoughts on these spy shots and why Suzuki are moving over to a parallel twin, then check out the video I've already made about it by clicking here.